Hey, welcome back to the podcast, and welcome back to the table. This is the Summoner's Circle podcast. I am your host, Vince. Today, I want to do something that Palladium quietly encourages, but a lot of us hesitate to actually do. I want to take something that clearly belongs in one of the corner of the Megaverse and drag it into another corner that was never designed for. Not to break the game, not to power creep into fantasy, but to see what survives with the move. The Juicer. Now, Rogue Scholar MDC did a video on this recently, and it had me thinking after his video about juicers, and I wanted to see what it would be like inside Palladium. So I started jotting down some ideas. Palladium Fantasy, excuse me. I wanted to jot down some ideas. So most people hear that word and their brain jump straight to Rifts because, neon armor, mega damage, giant robots. A setting that already assumes the world ended badly and kept going out of spite. So the knee-jerk reaction is rather simple. There's no place in fantasy for that, is what most people would more than likely say. And I think that reaction misses what the Juicer actually really is all about. Because if you strip the chrome off, if you ignore MDC entirely, the Juicer is not a sci-fi concept at all. It's a desperation class, a human who agrees to trade time for power. A body pushed past natural limits through artificial means, a ticking clock wrapped in muscle and rage. Fantasy has been doing that forever, to be honest. It uses different languages, but it's been doing it. So before this turns into a conversion exercise, I want to talk about what the Juicer is at its core, because that's the only way it really works in fantasy, I should say. The Juicer is not about damage numbers. The Juicer is about consent. Someone chooses this, and there's no prophecy, no divine blessing, no ancient bloodline thing going on. Just a person who looks at the world, looks at their own limits, and says, I will burn faster if it means I hit harder. Yeah, that's how the Juicers work. That choice matters a lot more in fantasy than it does in Rifts. In Rifts, the world is already loud, everything's exaggerated, and Juicers just kind of blend in, though they have their moments of, psychopathic-y, whatever you want to call it. In fantasy, the world remembers things. People live long enough to notice when someone is different. Churches will keep records, wizards gossip, kings do not like variables they cannot control. So a Juicer could not quietly exist in fantasy, and that's not a problem, that's the point. We gotta ground this in reality for another moment thinking here, as I had to pause for a moment for thought. Fantasy 2E already assumes the human body has limits. Encumbrance matters, fatigue matters, disease matters, aging even matters. The game already tracks slow consequences. The Juicer just simply accelerates them the way they're made. In Rifts, the Juicer's clock is dramatic because the setting is already absurdly lethal when it comes to everything. In fantasy, the clock becomes, kind of intimate. Every year matters, every second matters. Every village you pass through might outlive you. That changes how the class feels at the table when you think about it. Now, here's where I want to be very clear. This is not a plug-and-play class, or OCC. If you drop the Juicer into fantasy and treat it like a fighter with better numbers, you've missed the entire point of this conversation. The Juicer should feel wrong, socially wrong, morally uncomfortable, and spiritually questionable to anybody in the game. Because in fantasy, power always comes from somewhere. If a wizard throws a fireball, people accept it because magic is understood, feared, but it's established. It's magic, right? If a knight hits hard, people accept it because it's training, and steel and hitting something hard makes sense. If a Juicer does what a Juicer does, the obvious question becomes simple. Huh? How? What? Huh? And that question never really goes away. In a fantasy world, there are only a few answers that make a lot of sense. Alchemy, forbidden surgery, demonic bargains disguised as science, ancient techniques stolen from inhuman cultures, lost pre-cataclysm knowledge that should have stayed buried. All those things exist in Palladium fantasy already. They're just usually pointed at villains. So let's frame this a little bit properly here. A fantasy Juicer is not a hero archetype. It's a tragic one. someone who steps outside the natural order on purpose. And in fantasy, has always been very clear about how the world treats people who do that. The game already gives us a precedent here. Think about cursed weapons, think about demon-bound champions, think about warlocks who draw power from things they should not name. They get results. They also get consequences. The Juicer slides neatly into that design space. Now, mechanically, you do not need MDC, and some people really can't wrap their head around that, but you really don't. You do not need futuristic drug lists. You don't even need Chrome language. What you need is enhancement at a cost. You need boosted strength, boosted speed, boosted endurance. But every benefit has a shadow. Accelerated aging, organ failure, dependency, mental instability, spiritual corrosion. There's just so many things to list off that you kind of get lost on that list. Fantasy 2 already has a system that supports this mindset. Poison rules, disease progression, fatigue penalties, long-term injuries, insanities. You're not really inventing new mechanics, you are repurposing existing ones and making them unavoidable. And here's where this becomes interesting from a GM perspective. A fantasy juicer forces the campaign to acknowledge time. You cannot hand-wave years passing, you cannot casually skip seasons, and downtime kind of becomes dangerous. The juicer is not afraid of combat, the juicer is afraid of waiting. That tension alone makes the class worth examining. Now let's talk about culture for just a second here, because this is where most conversions fail. In Rifts, juicers are known. Feared, sure, but they're known. In fantasy, juicers is just a rumor first. No one knows about them because they've never been dropped in a fantasy world, or at least not your fantasy world, or if you're just following the book as written. Stories of a man who had fought 3 ogres alone and collapsed afterwards, a woman who moves like lightning but coughs blood between battle, a warrior who cannot sleep without any type of, alchemic draught. This is how the world sees him. This is how he enters the world. Not as a class option on a character sheet, but as a problem people whisper about. And if a player chooses this path, they are agreeing to that spotlight. This is not a background you forget. Healers will notice. Priests feel something is just quite off with these people. Summoners recognize the body has been altered in a way that mimic a kind of a possession state. Even mundane folks notice this crash attitude. And that's another important difference here when we're talking about this. In Rifts, juicers burn out in a world that burns out constantly and nobody cares. Well, not many care. In fantasy, it's not really a normal thing, and the crash is very visible. The shakes, the exhaustion, the withdrawal, that's all visible and noticeable to everybody. These moments are where the role-playing lives. Know what I'm saying? So how does a GM introduce this without blowing up the setting? Well, that's where we're going to get into a little further here. You don't introduce this as an OCC on the list. You introduce it as a temptation, like a forbidden procedure, a whispered option offered by someone who should not be trusted, a last resort when training and prayer are just not enough. This matters because once you frame it that way, a player understands what they're choosing. Not power, debt. And Palladium Fantasy, at its core, would love to see this debt. Debt to gods, debt to demons, debt to one's own failing body. The juicer just makes that debt measurable. And before anyone panics about balance, here's the quiet truth. So stop panicking. Fantasy 2e already allows characters to become terrifying if they survive long enough. High-level knights are pretty much monsters. High-level mages reshape reality. Summoners break encounters by just existing. The juicer does not outscale the game. It front-loads the power and backloads the suffering for a player character. This is a very Palladium-based idea if you think about it. Now think about the party dynamics. A juicer in a fantasy party is not the leader. They cannot be. They are the blade. They are the breach. They are the one who you send forward because tomorrow is definitely uncertain for them. That creates natural friction. The priest who wants to save their soul, the wizard who wants to study him, the mercenary who wants to see tools with expiration date, those tensions are not bugs. They're fuel. And this is where I wanted to pause for a second here and talk about something important about this whole thing. If your table is not comfortable with mortality, don't use this. This class only works if death is real, not cinematic death, not a roll a new character death, meaningful death. Because the Juicer's entire identity revolves around the knowledge that this just will end badly for them. Not might, it just will. It's guaranteed. And that mindset fits Palladium Fantasy far better than people give credit for. This is a game that already tells you the wilderness can kill you, the disease can wipe out a town, the old heroes fade and are forgotten over time. The Juicer just compresses that truth into one body. So when somebody actually says the Juicer doesn't belong in fantasy, what they really mean is it makes me uncomfortable. Well, maybe. And that's good, because that's exactly where it belongs. And with that groundwork laid, the next stretch we're going to talk about gets a little practical here. Let's talk about this in a sense. If you're going to allow a Juicer-style character in fantasy, the first thing you need to do is stop calling it Juicer in world. That word belongs to Rift's culture. It belongs there. In fantasy, names matter, and they carry weight. This would be known as something else, like an alchemy champion, I don't know, a burnout knight, a red vessel, a pack-bound warrior, just some suggestions that come to the top of my mind here. The title should sound wrong to common folk, not heroic and not noble. Something that makes a priest hesitate before saying it out loud. Like a burned out knight, or something like that. A red vessel. Kind of whisper it, like your grandmother used to do when she was talking about people. I know my grandmother used to do that. She used to whisper that. Each culture in your world might have a different name for it. Eastern territories might call them, Ashborns. The Western kingdoms refer to them as the Fleshbound. This reinforces that these individuals aren't part of an organized tradition, but rather isolated cases of the same terrible choices made across different lands. Because the second you rename it, you've already done half the work of making it fit in Palladium Fantasy. I always call it Palladium because I'm so used to playing 1E in the past. We always called it Palladium because that's how it started. So if I say that, I apologize. In Rifts, the Juicer procedure is clinical, horrifying, but standardized. In fantasy, it should never really feel clean to you. The surgery is without sanitation. Alchemy without fully understanding magic forced through flesh that was never meant to hold it. Which means the transformation itself is basically an event, not a character creation checkbox. The GM should treat this like a major story beat. Weeks of prep, rare ingredients, a specialist who is either brilliant, desperate, or just basically immoral, or could possibly be all three combined into one. Consider what the ingredients actually are. I don't know, like dragon's blood deleted to near homeopathic levels, crystallized time stolen from a dying god's temple, the rendering of fat of something that used to be human, ground bone from warriors who died undefeated. These aren't just flavor, they're plot hooks. Acquiring them should be its own mini campaign, and each ingredient should come with its own moral weight. Did you steal that sacred relic? Did you pay a necromancer? Did you kill for it? And most importantly, there should be a real chance it goes wrong. Not an instant death, that's just boring. Complications. Oh, Palladium loves complications. They love it. I think Kevin lived for it. Lingering defects, permanent scars, psychological instability. It's what Palladium does best and what the creators love. But let's be specific about those complications. Maybe the alchemy catalyst bonds incorrectly, and now the character's body temperature runs 10 degrees hotter than normal. They can't touch certain materials without pain. They steam in the rain. That'd be kind of interesting to see running around. This guy just constant steam raising off of him. Maybe the neural connections misfire, causing random muscle spasms at inopportune moments. Could you imagine being in the middle of a battle, trying to do something, and you're going to punch, and all of a sudden your arms and legs start spasming into like randomness, and you go running off into the forest because you can't control it because your legs are just spasming and making you just run in different directions? That'd be kind of interesting. Maybe the procedure awakens something dormant in the bloodline. A distant, inhuman ancestor trait suddenly surfaces. Horns. Bioluminescent veins. Eyes that reflect like an animal's eyes. That would really be interesting. Something that reminds the player this was not meant to be done. Now, mechanically, these bonuses should be simple and brutal. Physical strength goes up, physical prowess goes up, speed goes up, endurance goes up. And you're probably saying, well, what numbers should they? What would you do? How would you handle it? The best thing I've come up with is adding a flat +4 to physical strength, a +6 to physical prowess, and +8 to speed, a +20 to the natural SDC. These aren't percentage increases, they're raw additions that make the character immediately dangerous but don't scale exponentially. The key is that these bonuses remain static. At level 1, you're terrifying. At level 10, you're still working with the same enhanced baseline while everyone else is slowly caught up their experience. Not endlessly, not scaling forever. This is a spike, not a curve. The character becomes dangerously immediate, but every benefit must have an attached pressure to it. Accelerated aging measures in months, not years, daily alchemy dependence, withdrawal penalties that actually hurt for missing doses. For every month of adventuring, the character ages 2 months biologically. For every month of heavy combat, more than 3 times significant encounters per week, they age 3 months. This isn't just a cosmetic thing. At certain thresholds, physical attributes begin to decline. So after 2 years of game time, they start losing bonuses. After 3 years, they're operating at below the original baseline. Here's the key here. Penalties do not wait for dramatic moments. They show up during travel, during downtime, during social scenes. The juicer crashes when nothing is happening. That's basically how they work. That's where fantasy really shines. A blizzard hits and the juicer burns through their alchemy supply twice as fast. A long march drains them harder than anybody else. They're actually worse at endurance travel than standard characters despite the enhanced attribute, because their body is working overtime just to maintain an equilibrium. Disease progression hits them worse, not better. Their immune system is so overstimulated at this point that it starts attacking healthy tissue. A common cold becomes a week-long ordeal for them, when it takes a normal person in fantasy probably a couple days. This reinforces the idea that the body is being pushed past safety, not elevated beyond it. Healing. That's another thing we really need to talk about, because this is where the GM will instinctively break the class without realizing it. Standard healing should not fix juicer damage. It could stabilize it, it can reduce symptoms, but it cannot reverse the clock. Healing magic treats wounds. It does not rebuild an organ that is being chemically destroyed on purpose. Though some people may argue it can, it doesn't. That's where it gets a little interesting. Different types of healing interact with the juicer condition in unexpected ways. Divine healing might stabilize hit points, but it causes excruciating pain as holy energy conflicts with the alchemy corruption. Druidic healing works better. Nature does not judge, it simply mends. But it's temporary, fading within a couple hours, or hour, or whatever. Necromantic healing actually works frightening well, which should be disturbing to everyone involved in the situation. What does it mean that death magic feels more comfortable with your body than life magic? That creates an important boundary. Clerics can help, but they cannot save you from your own choice. That tension between faith and futility is very Palladium fantasy. Now consider how this interacts with magic users. Wizards are going to be fascinated, not impressed, fascinated, because this is a living experiment to them, a walking proof that power can be extracted without spellcasting or divine permission. A Diabolist might recognize elements of their own binding rituals in the juicer's condition. The way alchemy compounds chain themselves to the nervous system mirrors how demonic contracts kind of anchor to the soul. A summoner might notice the extra-dimensional entities show unusual interest in this juicer. Not hostile interest, but a curiosity that they need to fulfill. As the character's altered state makes them visible to things that normally can't perceive mortals clearly, that makes wizards cautious and uncomfortable. Summoners and Diabolists will notice something else. The body has been altered in ways that resemble possession, not spirituality, but structurality. That raises uncomfortable questions. Is this person really still fully human? Or whatever? What happens when something else tries to move in? Can a demon possess someone who is already hosting an alchemic intrusion? Or does the corrupted physiology make possession even easier because the soul's grip on the flesh has been deliberately weakened? Those are questions you need to answer kind of immediately when designing this. They're possibilities that grow more relevant as the campaign progresses. Now, religion, this is where the class really earns its place. Most gods in fantasy value order, balance, sacrifice, and tradition. A juicer rejects patience. They choose results now. But different deities will have vastly different reactions to this. A god of war might see a juicer as the ultimate warrior, someone willing to sacrifice everything for victory. They would love that. A god of healing would see them as an abomination, a deliberate corruption of the body's secret design. A death god might be grimmingly approving. Here is someone who understands mortality and chooses to weaponize it. The trickster god would find this whole thing hilarious and tragic in equal measure. Some other gods might see it as blasphemy, others will see it as a form of martyrdom. Either way, the church reacts. Not with lightning bolts, with concern, suspicion, and sometimes condemnation. A priest traveling with a juicer is not just a healer. They're a witness to a slow motion of martyrdom. And that puts them in an ethically complicated position. Do they enable the character by providing support, or do they withdraw support to discourage the practice? That changes how divine magic feels at the table. Now, I just want to say that talking about balance at the party level, because this is always a kind of a fear with most GMs and players. Short answer, yes, they won't overshadow everyone, but only if you let them live like a normal character. The juicer is not meant to be sustainable. They dominate fights early. They struggle everywhere else. They chew through resources. They create urgency. That forces everything on the other party members to make decisions faster. Do we rest knowing this hurts them? Do we push forward and risk collapse? Do we burn favors to get more alchemist supplies? These decisions belong to the whole table, and that's important. Let's also talk about what dominates fights actually means, because they're going to. Yeah, they hit harder, they move faster, but they also become an obvious target in battle. Every intelligent enemy will recognize them immediately as a threat and focus fire accordingly on them. They draw aggression like a magnet, which means they're taking more damage than anyone else. Combined with their compromised healing situation, they're constantly on the edge of being taken out of the fight. They're a glass cannon that feels like a freight train but cracks under sustained pressure. It should pull the party into consequences when there's a juicer involved. A juicer should not advance level normally. They don't exactly grow, they decay. Advancement becomes horizontal, not vertical. New techniques, better control, temporary stabilizers, not more raw power. Instead of gaining attribute bonus on level ups, the juicer gains techniques that let them manage their condition more efficiently. At level 3, they lean into induce controlled micro crashes that prevent catastrophic shutdown. Level 5, they master a breathing technique that extends the alchemy supply